So today I'm going to be sharing with you some of my favorite self-help books and why I think they might be able to help you too. If you love this content, please don't forget to click the subscribe button and the notification bell. This way, every time I upload a new video, you'll be the first to know. Anyone who is struggling with narcissistic abuse, anybody who is struggling with codependency, anybody who is looking to evolve spiritually, mentally, and emotionally, and you are someone that understands that you need your brain to do this. When I think about so many people in the spiritual community, we have to start talking about how the brain processes information. When I think about people in the psychological community, we have to consider spirit, this idea that most of us consider ourselves spiritually natured or energetically natured. So I think coming at this from a holistic viewpoint, understanding mind, body, and soul, is really beneficial and offers us the best chances of healing from all different types of emotional issues which start in the mind, right? You grow up feeling like you're not good enough, that's going to mess you up. You end up feeling like it's your fault that your parents drink and they're narcissists and they beat you and they do this and they do that. You're going to be messed up. You grow up in a dysfunctional home, what goes in goes out, right? Your parents don't think well. Those are your models for life. Hello, it's not your fault. So if you're like me, it took you a while to figure this stuff out, that it's not you, it's just your programming. And the people in your life kept telling you that you were the crazy one, that no one thought like you, so therefore you were wrong. See, they couldn't think like you, so that meant that you were crazy. Isn't that nuts? Isn't that just, but that's just the way it is for so many of us, right? It took me a long time to figure out that my parents didn't know everything, even though I thought that they did, and I believe that they did. It took me a long time to figure out that it was okay for me to feel my feelings. It took me a long time to figure out that it was okay that I didn't agree with my family. It took me a long time to understand that I was a separate 3D autonomous being from my family and that I didn't have to live according to their plan for me. Because I didn't know who I was until, or unless they were telling me who I was. And who I was really wasn't who I was. So of course it's a maddening situation. One of the ideas about that really changed my life was this idea that we are objects in motion, stay in motion until acted upon by a force. So when I think about children who come from dysfunctional homes, we stay on that path until a force takes over or interrupts the process. And I believe that can be our own mind. It can be hope. And that's what I really pray, that those of you who study this channel, I get so many emails from people say, I'm binging on your channel. Boom, boom, boom. Things are clicking. I'm not only getting information, but I'm feeling understood. I'm feeling heard. You're not just shooting information at me, and you're also giving me action steps. You're giving me a plan. That's the whole purpose, right? I think that in life, that when you learn something, you should be of service. And so I created this channel to be of service, to help people who might not be able to afford therapy, to reach people in different countries who might not be able to afford going to talk to someone, or who might not be able to even explain how they're feeling. So I really hope that if you subscribe to this channel, that you're getting value. And I also hope that you understand that as you heal, you helped heal the world. So I want to talk about my first favorite book in the entire world, and that is Codependent No More, Beyond Codependency, and that's by my mentor, Melody Beattie. And so why is Codependent No More so important to me? It's important to me because it was the first time that I felt that I had found an author that had been there, that was speaking my language. And that's why I also love the work of Nathaniel Branden, which I will get to eventually in this session. But Melody Beattie is someone who has come at this from the angle of therapist as well as survivor of codependency, and someone who understands the recovery journey. And I'm just so impressed with her work. And if you are someone who is trying to figure out how to become more accountable and responsible without feeling all sorts of shame that you cannot retrieve yourself from, then I really do suggest that you start with Codependent No More. So if you're codependent, you struggle with this idea that you don't know who you are. It's a loss of selfhood. You may have grown up feeling invisible in your childhood home. You grew up perhaps watching parents who were codependent. You may have been raised by a narcissistic parent, or a parent who had an addiction or a mental health issue. And you now fawn in response to other people's anger, or you might even freeze. You may even fight and feel like you need to run away. So the 4 trauma responses that most of us are familiar with are fawn, fight, freeze, and flee. When you grow up in a dysfunctional home, it's so sad because you live in survival. And we have to understand that energy is either moving forward or backward. And so if we're struggling with depression, we're moving backward, mentally, emotionally, chemically, biologically. We're not moving forward up the scale, we're moving backward. If we're struggling with anxiety, we're not moving up the scale, we're moving backwards. And I think that's because we're going against the natural flow of life, which is love, which is growth. And that's why we're here. We're here to grow. And I hope that by listening to these sessions, you are growing, that you're not allowing your past to keep you constricted. And I hope that what I share today will help give you a roadmap of sorts to help you out of the nonsense that is childhood programming, codependency, and recovery from narcissistic abuse, yada, yada, yada. And so I'm going to read to you a couple of passages that I have highlighted that really struck me in reading this book by Melody Beatty. My first encounter with codependence occurred in the early 60s. This was before people tormented by other people's behavior were called codependents, and before people addicted to alcohol and other drugs were labeled chemically dependent. Although I didn't know what codependents were, I usually knew who they were. As an alcoholic and addict, I stormed through life helping create other codependents. Bam! Melody Beatty is bringing it on. She's telling us that she understands that through her addiction, she was helping to create other codependents, which I think is just absolutely amazing. And so if you are someone who is codependent, it's very likely that you have someone in your life that you're trying to fix, you're trying to rescue and enable. Codependents were a necessary nuisance. They were hostile, controlling, manipulative, indirect, guilt-producing, difficult to communicate with, generally disagreeable, sometimes downright hateful, and a hindrance to my compulsion to get high. They hollered at me, they hid my pills, made nasty faces at me, poured my alcohol down the sink, tried to keep me from getting more drugs, wanted to know why I was doing this to them, and asked what was wrong with me. But they were always there, ready to rescue me from self-created disasters. The codependents in my life didn't understand me, and the misunderstanding was mutual. I didn't understand me, and I didn't understand them. She goes on to write that my first professional encounter with codependence occurred years later in 1976. At that time in Minnesota, addicts and alcoholics had become chemically dependent. Their families and friends had become significant others, and I had become a recovering addict and alcoholic. By then, I also worked as a counselor in chemical dependency field, that vast network of institution programs and agencies that helps chemically dependent people get well. Because I'm a woman and most of the significant others at that time were women, and because I had the least seniority and none of my coworkers wanted to do it, my employer at the Minneapolis Treatment Center told me to organize support groups with wives of addicts in the program. I wasn't prepared for the task. I found codependence to be hostile, controlling, manipulative, indirect, guilt-producing, difficult to communicate with, and more. In my group, I saw people who felt responsible for the entire world, but they refused to take responsibility for leading and living their own lives. I saw people who constantly gave to others, but didn't know how to receive. I saw people who give until they were angry, exhausted, and emptied of everything. I saw some give until they gave up. I even saw one woman give and suffer so much that she died of old age and natural causes at age 33. She was the mother of 5 children and the wife of an alcoholic who had been sent to prison for the 3rd time. I worked with women who were experts at taking care of everyone around them, yet these women doubted their ability to take care of themselves. Does that ring true to anyone listening? I saw mere shells of people racing mindlessly from one activity to another. I saw people pleasers, martyrs, stoics, tyrants, withering vines, clinging vines, and borrowing from H. Sackler's line in his play, The Great White Hope, pinched up faces giving off the miseries. Most codependents were obsessed with other people. With great precision and detail, they could recite long lists of the addict's deeds and misdeeds, what he or she thought, felt, did, and said, and what he or she didn't think, feel, do, and say. The codependents knew what the alcoholic or addict should and shouldn't do, and they wondered extensively why he or she did or didn't do it. Yet, these codependents who had such great insight into others could not see themselves. They didn't know what they were feeling. They weren't sure what they thought. And they didn't know what, if anything, they could do to solve their own problems, if indeed they had any problems other than the alcoholics. It was a formidable group, these codependents. They were aching and complaining and trying to control everyone and everything but themselves. And except for a few quiet pioneers of family therapy, many counselors, including me, didn't know how to help them. The chemical dependency field was flourishing, but help focused on the addict. Literature and training on family therapies were scarce. What did codependents need? What did they want? Weren't they just an extension of the alcoholic, a visitor to the treatment center? Why couldn't they cooperate instead of always making problems? The alcoholic had an excuse for being so crazy. He was drunk. These significant others had no excuse. They were this way, sober. Soon I subscribed to 2 popular beliefs. These crazy codependents are sicker than the alcoholics. And no wonder, the alcoholic drinks. Well, who wouldn't with a crazy spouse like that? But then I had been sober for a while. I was beginning to understand myself, but I didn't understand codependency. I tried but couldn't until years later when I became so caught up in the chaos of a few alcoholics that I stopped living my own life. I stopped thinking. I stopped feeling positive emotions. And I was left with rage, bitterness, hatred, fear, depression, helplessness, despair, and guilt. At times, I wanted to stop living. I couldn't say no to anything but fun activities if my life depended on it, which it did. My relationships with friends and family members were in shambles. I felt terribly victimized. I lost myself and didn't know how it happened. I didn't know what had happened. I thought I was going crazy. And I thought, shaking a finger at the people around me, it's their fault. Sadly, aside from myself, nobody knew how badly I really felt. My problems were my secret. Unlike the alcoholics and other troubled people in my life, I wasn't going around making big messes and expecting someone else to clean up after me. In fact, next to the alcoholics, I looked good. I was so responsible, so dependable. Sometimes I wasn't sure I had a problem. I knew. Sometimes I wasn't sure I had a problem. I knew. I felt miserable, but I didn't understand why my life wasn't working. After floundering in despair for a while, I began to understand. Like many people who judge others harshly, I realized I had just taken a very long and painful walk in the shoes of those I had judged. I now understood those crazy codependents because I had become one. Gradually, I began to climb out of the black abyss. Along the way, I developed a passionate interest in the subject of codependency. As a counselor, although I no longer worked full-time in the field, I still considered myself one. As a writer, my curiosity was provoked. As a flaming, careening codependent who needed help, I also had a personal stake in the subject. What happens to people like me? How does it happen? Why? Most important, what do codependents need to do to feel seen and stay that way? And so if you are struggling with codependency, you can see and understand and hear how lyrical Melody writes and how beautiful she helps you understand that she gets it. She was there. She even judged codependence because she was the alcoholic. She was the addict. And she was trying to be, there were codependents in her life that were trying to control her, pouring her alcohol down the drain. And she didn't get it. Like, dude, leave me alone, right? And then she gets sober. And then she has to work with codependence. And then she finds herself on the opposite end of codependency, where she is the codependent, taking care of everyone else. So she now understands what it feels like to lose yourself inside a relationship dynamic. And so I would suggest, if any of this resonates with you, that you do not hesitate to run out and get Codependent No More by Melody Beattie. Patricia Evans. So Patricia Evans wrote The Verbally Abusive Relationship. Now, why was this important to me? This was so important to me because when I was in my marriage, I couldn't understand what was going on. Everyone told me that I was the crazy one. My ex did a very good job at making other people feel really good when he was in their presence. And behind closed doors, there was a lot of passive aggressiveness. There was a lot of shutting down. There was a lot of stonewalling. There was a lot of projection. There was just a whole lot of nothing, like out, like I don't want to participate in this relationship. I'm not saying that I was perfect, because no one's perfect. And I know that I was not perfect, right? But I needed a partner who could and would and wanted to work this out. I could not live with a rock who thought he was perfect and, regardless of his flaws, just pointed at mine. And so it was really difficult. And so when I began to understand the verbally abusive relationship, things began to make sense to me. So I started to realize that I'm not crazy, that there really is something wrong here. And I wanted to share just a couple of the things that I wrote in the margin of this book. We begin to believe there is something wrong with our perceptions when we're dealing with someone who is verbally abusive. So verbal abuse is a kind of battering which doesn't leave evidence, comparable to the bruises of physical battering. It can be just as painful, and recovery can take much longer. The victim of abuse lives in a gradually more confusing realm. In public, she is with one man. In private, he may become another. Hello? Wow. Someone knows that's what's happening? Because you start to think it's you. And they change because of you. It's all your fault, is what you think. So subtle diminishing or angry outbursts, cool indifference, or one-upmanship, witty sarcasm or silent withholding, manipulative coercion or unreasonable demands are common occurrences. They are, however, cloaked in a "what's wrong with you?" making a big deal out of nothing attitude, and many, many other forms of denial. Often for the verbally abused woman or man, there is no other witness to her reality, and no one can understand her experience. Friends and family may see the abuser as a really nice guy, and certainly he sees himself as one. So if you have been verbally abused, you have been told in subtle and not so subtle ways that your perception of reality is wrong and that your feelings are wrong. Consequently, you may doubt your own experience and at the same time not realize that you are doing so. I suggest that as you read about the experience of verbal abuse, you notice if this kind of experience seems familiar to you. So I think that this is a fantastic book if you are someone who is trying to figure out what are the dynamics I'm dealing with. I think the first part is understanding what went wrong, right? Gaining the information that you need, right? Then applying it to your life, your situation, and then acting on it. This is like a process, but the first process is understanding what went wrong. And that, by the way, if you want additional help with all of this stuff, like learning how to gain control of your emotions, understanding what went wrong, and what the process is to heal, check out my 12-week breakthrough coaching program. Because I built that program after reading, 200 self-help books, and after creating a roadmap out of my own codependent mind that was just all subconscious childhood programming. I was running on empty. I was in this type of relationship. I did think I was crazy. I did doubt my reality. I did have to go no contact. I did have to learn how to rewire my subconscious mind. And I did have to learn how to shift my perceptions inside, and that's when my life changed. So if you're someone who needs help with that or wants to learn more, go to my website, www.lisayromano.com, and click 12-week Breakthrough Coaching Program. So another thing that Patricia says is living in this reality requires great self-esteem and great trust in the process of life itself. One of the things that struck me about Patricia's work was this idea that I don't have to accept someone's anger. When someone is angry, they are dumping their toxic anger onto you, and you do not have to accept it. Amazing, amazing. She quotes Alice Miller, "By uncovering the unconscious rules of the power game in your relationship and the methods by which it attains legitimacy, we are certainly in a position to bring about basic changes." So if you are in this type of a relationship and you're trying to figure out the rules by which this relationship happens, because every relationship has their own sets of rules. We don't realize it and we don't think of it that way, but Patricia Evans's book will definitely help you figure that out. Another book that I absolutely love was It Didn't Start With You, right, by Mark Wolin. Now, this is a book that helps you understand how inherited family trauma shapes who you are. And it also helps you understand how you can break the cycle. So that is absolutely critical, that we understand that we're not in a petri dish, that who we are has been shaped by generations before us. And again, remember what I said, it starts with understanding. You have to understand yourself. And it's not just about me, mom, and dad. Understand your grandparents and how they affected your mother and your father. And then go back. Who shaped your grandparents? Then keep going back. And see if you can get this like eagle's eye perspective of the many generations of people that impacted your mother and father, which eventually impacted you. This is a fascinating, fascinating book. Given that a generation in humans is approximately 20 years, the results from human studies spanning multiple generations are still pending. However, with the research demonstrating that stress can be transmitted through at least 3 generations of mice, the researchers surmise that children born to human parents who experienced a traumatic or stressful event would also likely pass the pattern down not only to their children, but to their grandchildren as well. Uncannily, the Bible in Numbers 14:18 appears to corroborate the claims of modern science or vice versa, that the sins, iniquities, or consequences, depending on which translation you read, of the parents can affect the children up to the 3rd and 4th generations. Specifically, the New Living Translation states, "The Lord is slow to anger and filled with unfailing love, forgiving every kind of sin and rebellion. But he does not excuse the guilty. He lays the sins of the parents upon their children. The entire family is affected, even children in the 3rd and 4th generations." As new discoveries in epigenetics are revealed, new information about how to mitigate the transgenerational effects of trauma could become standard practice. Researchers are now finding that our thoughts, inner images, and daily practices, such as visualization and meditation, can change the way our genes express, an idea we will examine in more detail in the next chapter. So if you are interested in epigenetics, if you are interested in understanding yourself in terms of how your parents' generational karma, their trauma, which karma is the law of cause and effect, right? What happens in one generation might happen in the next generation. And when I say happen, I mean there's an energetic blueprint. Now, again, we understand that there's a layer above the genes, that it's not the gene. There's a layer above the gene that causes the gene to express itself. And between that layer is space. We have the ability to affect that space so that, let's say, a particular cancer gene never expresses, right? And we know that stress affects the way we feel, it affects what we visualize, it affects what we put in our bodies, it affects what we pay attention to. And so if you are someone who's interested in epigenetics, then that is a book that will definitely pique your interest, and it'll also help you understand yourself on a generational level and give you great ideas on how you can begin to change the course and the pattern of your life. So the next two books are, love this man, John Bradshaw, Healing the Shame That Binds You, and his book, Homecoming. John Bradshaw is a very talented author. Unfortunately, he has passed on. But he comes at this from the angle of a survivor also. He is someone who understands. He's just not throwing information at you and telling you what he thinks you should do. This is someone who has walked the path, and he absolutely understands what it takes to heal. So I want to read to you a little bit about what he writes about intimacy dysfunction. Many adult children move back and forth between the fear of abandonment and the fear of engulfment. Hello. Some are permanently isolated because of their fears of being smothered by another person. Others refuse to leave destructive unions due to their terror of being alone. Most fluctuate between the two extremes. This is a man who gets it. You know, Melody Beatty talks about the pendulum swinging from one side to the other side, where you can be a codependent and like focus entirely on another human being and think you know better than them and tell them what to do and tell them how to live their lives while you're ignoring yourself. And you can be someone who absolutely wants this person's attention and wants them to see you. And you may even be driven by connection. You believe that if this person gets well, then you'll finally be connected. And then once you go into recovery, sometimes what happens is the pendulum swings to the other side, where you don't want anyone to get close to you, right? So you fear engulfment. So you end up playing this cat and mouse game with friends, with lovers, with partners, where you want them but you don't want them, right? So Pia Melody talks about this also in Facing Love Addiction, which I'm going to talk about. So he goes on to say that Herkimer's relationship pattern is to fall madly in love with the woman. He's talking about someone in his book. Once he becomes intimate and close, he begins to pull away and distance himself from her. He does this by slowly gathering a list of criticisms. The items on the list are usually about small idiosyncratic behaviors. He initiates small squabbles over these behaviors. His partner usually withdraws and pouts for a day or two. Then they are reunited intensely, making wild, passionate love and experiencing deep sharing. This lasts until he feels smothered again and creates distance by starting another fight. We don't have to live this way. So if this sounds like something that you're dealing with, I would definitely check out The Homecoming. That's just a tidbit of what this man offers. It's amazing. He has graphics in here. He talks about the inner child. He's got some journaling prompts. I also offer journaling prompts in Codependent Manifesto, the Codependency Manifesto. So if that's something that you like to do, he's just incredible. So definitely check that out. This book sold more than 1.3 million copies, Healing the Shame That Binds You. Now, shame is a big deal, okay? And a lot of us don't understand how shame affects us. We really don't. We feel anger, we feel sadness, we feel depressed, we feel fearful, right? But we don't understand how shame might be at the root of it when we come from dysfunctional homes. So he's got a part here on page 104, numbing out. Any intolerable event is signaled by strong emotions. Emotions are a form of energy in motion. Gotta love him. They signal us of a loss, a threat, or satisfaction. Sadness is about losing something we cherish. Anger and fear are signals of actual or impending threats to our well-being. Joy signals that we are fully satisfied. Whenever a child is shamed through some form of abandonment, feelings of anger, hurt, and sadness arise. Since shame-based parents are shame-bound in all their emotions, they cannot tolerate their children's emotions. Therefore, they shame their children's emotions. When their emotions are shamed, children numb out, so they don't feel their emotions. It is not clearly exactly how the mechanisms of numbing out works. It certainly has to do with tensing muscles, changing breathing patterns, and fantasizing abandonment. Once an emotion is toxically shame-bound, one feels numb. The emotional avoidance is sealed by learning to avoid the avoidance. You know what? Now, I'm an author. You can't talk like that unless you've been there. You can't write like that unless you understand what the heck is going on in the mind and the body of a child who has experienced these types of experiences. So now we're going to talk about the man, Peter Walker, complex PTSD from surviving to thriving. Now, let's understand that energy either moves forward or backward. Think about it. Energy either moves forward or backward. It's never standing still. When you are in survival, you're not thriving. Your energy is not moving forward. And so, on some level, you're moving backward. You're not evolving cognitively, emotionally, spiritually, right? Physically, you're going backwards. That's why you feel rotten and depressed and sad and heavy. And so this is a book that will definitely help you understand the trauma responses and help you better understand. Remember, step one is understanding yourself. So he writes, a fight response is triggered when a person suddenly responds aggressively to something threatening. A flight response is triggered when a person responds to a perceived threat by fleeing or symbolically by launching into hyperactivity. A freeze response is triggered when a person realizing resistance is futile, gives up, numbs out into dissociation, and or collapses as if accepting the inevitability of being hurt. A fawn response is triggered when a person responds to a threat by trying to be pleasing or helpful in order to appease and forestall an attacker. This fourfold response potential will heretofore be referred to as the 4 Fs. Traumatized children are often over-gravitate to one of these response patterns to survive, and as time passes, these four modes become elaborated into entrenched defensive structures that are similar to narcissistic fight, obsessive-compulsive flight, dissociative freeze, or codependent fawn defenses. But these structures help children survive their horrific childhoods, but leave them very limited and narrow in how they respond to life. Even worse, they remain locked in these patterns in adulthood when they no longer need to rely so heavily on one primary response pattern. It is important to understand that variances in the childhood abuse neglect patterns, birth order, and genetic predispositions result in people polarizing to their particular F4 type. What we want to do is understand that the goal when we're using self-help books is really to understand ourselves. I have coached psychologists, psychiatrists. I know it sounds crazy because I'm a college dropout, but it's true. I have coached psychologists and psychiatrists, therapists, social workers, you name it. And one of the things that I have discovered is that very oftentimes people who are studying this information as a career have always applied the information and the knowledge to someone else. Now, that's fantastic when you're trying to help someone else, but we're talking about self-help. We're talking about helping the self, right? I said to a very wonderful professor of ethics that I worked with at a college, we actually did a couple of college classes together, and I said to him, I think that a major problem with philosophers is that they study other philosophers, but they don't study the self. I think that those of us who are into, and I consider myself a self-help junkie, but those of us who are taking the time to say, whoa, wait a minute, I don't feel right, and I'm willing to cut myself away from this paradigm for a while and figure out what's wrong. And then we all think, okay, it's not just me, it's them. But then eventually, if you stay on the path long enough, you cycle back to, but now it's me, because I have been patterned for this trauma response. And this thing called subconscious programming, it's real. We just talked about it, right? In all of the books that I just shared with you, that you become solidified in these thinking patterns, and the only person who can change them at the end of the day is you. So I want to talk about Pia Mellody. My book's a little dirty, but I read my books. So Pia Mellody was the author that I turned to when I had my drop the mop moment. The drop the mop moment was the moment I was separated from my ex-husband, and he told me basically after maybe our last therapy session together to get an effing attorney. That's what he said. Get an effing attorney. I'm done. It's over. We're going to get a divorce. I'm through with you. Like, I'm not doing this anymore. And I said, okay. And I didn't know that he was bluffing. I had no idea. So I went, and my knees were shaking, but I took him at his word. Now remember, when you're dealing with someone with high narcissistic traits, they're always trying to intimidate you. So oftentimes they throw a threat out there and they don't expect you to take it. How did I know he didn't mean go get an attorney? Well, I got an attorney. Another thing that he said was, when I leave, I'm done with you. So if you're going to do anything, make sure you go do it. If you're going to mess around with someone, go do it, because I am. Again, those are the words that he used. So I'm thinking, we're done. We're separated. This is over. I'm getting an attorney. Now, in hindsight, I wish I didn't jump into a relationship, but when you're a love addict / codependent in the fawn response, afraid of abandonment, your family thinks you're nuts, and you have lost everything that you know, it's not so easy to make healthy decisions. What kind of decisions do you make? Messed up decisions. You don't know any other way. Now, I am not excusing jumping right into a relationship. I'm explaining that's what I did, humbly. And I'm saying I wish I never did, because I really wish I never did. But anyway, the first relationship after we were separated, I found myself craving this person who I didn't even like, which was really bizarre. I didn't like this person. I just couldn't be alone. I just felt so vulnerable. Like, imagine if you had no skin and no skeleton, and your liver was on the outside, and your pancreas and your kidneys and your brain was on the outside. I felt that raw. I felt that afraid. I felt that exposed. And everything that I knew, I was losing. I had nothing to cling to. And it was, I wish it wasn't that way, but it was. But I found myself in a relationship with someone I really didn't even like, but I was addicted. Literally chemically addicted. Addicted to the fear of being alone, and thinking that, and associating all this fear with being alone and tremendous pleasure with not being alone, and having my thought process be knocked offline in terms of, well, where's the rationale in all of that? Because, you know, you could end up jumping out of the frying pan into the fire, chica. You know, no bueno. But there was no rational thought. There was just pure reactivity. I'm alone. I'm losing everything. Oh no, I can't be alone. Let me find the first single guy that will have me, right? Because I had a moral code. Like, I just always had that moral code. Like, I would never be with another woman's husband or another woman's boyfriend. That's in my fiber. And so, you know, I ended up with the first single person that would have me. And it was no bueno. But I found myself craving this person. And I was mopping the floor one day, and I dropped the mop when I heard, "You crave him." And I was like, oh my God. And the minute I had that aha moment, I was like scrambling. At the time, there was no really big internet. There was no such thing. So I ran to Barnes & Noble, and I'm looking for relationship addiction. And I come across Pia Melody, Facing Love Addiction. This woman got me through the deep night of the ego, where I was just like, holy cow, like facing myself, facing my programming, facing my dysfunction, facing my non-realistic, non-rational thought processes, facing it all. Like, I was in bed for 3 days, like, no joke. And if I didn't have the kids to get out of bed to take care of, I don't know what would have happened, because I was just in such a bad place. So I wanted to read something that I think might help some people. So she writes, "The fantasy of a rescuer is born. One way such children may escape the pain of severe abandonment by the parents is to fantasize about being rescued by a hero of some kind." I did that from the time I was 7. Little girls may imagine a knight in shining armor who has loving feelings for her and who does things that demonstrate this love by connecting with her, finally giving her life meaning and vitality. The fantasy is often very much like the fairy tale Sleeping Beauty, in which Sleeping Beauty lies asleep out of touch with herself and her surroundings until the life-giving kiss of Prince Charming awakens her. I literally had this fantasy for many, many years. Children spend so much time in this fantasy world because it creates a state of euphoria. I spent hours as a child daydreaming about my knight in shining armor. If I felt bad, I could play out this fantasy in my mind, get high in about 10 minutes, and stay there for at least 2 or 3 hours. I think that when we put a pleasurable picture in our minds and think about it, we can stimulate an emotional response to it that may lead to the release of endorphins into our system. Endorphins literally relieve emotional pain and create varying degrees of euphoria. Such children come to believe that by connecting with such a hero, they, like Sleeping Beauty, will come alive and be safe and valuable at last. So the issue that this brought up for me when I was reading this was, A, I felt seen, like I'm not crazy, like my childhood patterning, my trauma responses, my feeling completely abandoned, like everything and every aspect of me made sense. Like all of these layers of Lisa began to make sense. Other people were feeling this way too, so I didn't feel so bizarre. I literally, when I was like 7 years old, looked up at the sky and thought, I've been dropped out of the sky by an alien mothership. I don't belong here. I don't feel like these people are my family. Am I even real? When I was 7, I used to look into the mirror, my mother's bedroom mirror, and think, do they see what I see? Because I have green eyes, but no one ever said, oh, Lisa has green eyes. They talked about my brother's eyes being brown like my dad, and my sister's eyes were the color of the Caribbean Sea, just like my mom. But I was the odd man out, so I thought, well, maybe that's why they don't love me, because my eyes are a different color, right? I doubted they were green. On my license, up until college, I would say they're hazel. My eyes are freaking green. That's how bad my reality was of self. I was so out of touch, I couldn't even claim my eyes were green. Want to hear a funny story? After my ex kicked our children out of his house a few years ago, he has a different version of the story, but 4 grown adults have one version. He told my children around the same time that I had brown eyes. I have green eyes, like the color of grass. My ex thought I had brown eyes. So anyway, that's just how out of touch he was. And no, he's not colorblind. So she talks about the distinction between love addiction and codependency. Our notions about how to live life come from our connection with our caregivers. Dear one, do you hear that? Let me read that again. Our notions about how to live come from our connections with caregivers. Your programming. It's not you, it's your programming. Abandonment experiences leave children with the messages of worthlessness. I could cry, as well as with the distorted sense of how to care appropriately for themselves. That's why we don't know how to take care of ourselves. When a child's natural characteristics are not nurtured, can you just cry? The child develops dysfunctional coping behaviors that illustrate the 5 primary adult symptoms of codependence cited in Chapter 1. Number 1, abandoning and abusive behaviors develop because the caregivers did not give appropriate help to their children with regard to life's basic issues regarding self-nurture and healthy interpersonal relating skills. I want you to understand that your parents and your caregivers were supposed to nurture you and give you the life's basic skills. But if you did not come from that type of a home, it is not your fault if you don't have the basic skills for how to nurture your amazing self, okay? That's important that you realize that. The first and fourth core symptoms are especially prevalent in love addicts: low self-esteem, and inability to properly care for self. The third core symptom, which relates to distorted thinking about reality, who the other party is also involved. The other 2 symptoms are also apparent, though they are less prominent. When the pain of codependence gets too intense, many of us turn to an addiction to medicate the pain because we do not know any other way to get relief. We find a substance, compulsive behavior, or person to soothe the pain caused by our inability to be in a healthy relationship with ourselves. If the substance, compulsive behavior, or person does a good job, we keep the process going, even though harmful consequences occur more and more often. Eventually, we become addicted to the substance, the person, or compulsive behavior. The function of an addiction is to remove an intolerable reality. Okay, now that released so much shame in me, because what I was able to piece together in my mind was Lisa came from a codependent marriage and ended up in a love-addicted experience. The pain of the divorce and having 3 little kids. I did not have a college education. My ex-husband sold our business. I had no way of making a living. He sold our house. He lied about how much money he made. And he worked for his parents. So how was I going to prove in court that he made X amount of dollars? So I was a slave to whatever he said he was going to give me, or said his income was. I could not battle it, okay? My parents thought I was the problem, so I didn't have them to turn to. It was bad. It was really, really bad. And the pain of that reality, what did I do? I relied on fantasy, just like I had done as a child, dreaming about this boy that I loved, that I write about in The Road Back to Me, dreaming about being his girlfriend, dreaming about him calling me, imagining the phone calls that we had, and understanding that that came from a deep sense of pain. Oh my gosh, did that free me. I finally understood how I ended up in this crazy-ass, dysfunctional, ridiculous relationship with someone that I would have never rationally chosen. Now, then you have to deal with the shame of being in that and knowing that people aren't going to get it. But you know what? You got to get to a point where you understand this is your journey and you're going to make mistakes and patterns are going to arise. You have to forgive yourself. Module 2 in my 12-week program, we jump into this type of shame when you start to feel like, oh my God, what have I done? Because we have to have the tools to help us realize how to overcome the shame that shows up when we develop the understanding that, okay, I'm not crazy, okay, it's them, but it's all coming back to me. And what have I done along the way, right? When we start lining the reality up of how we have affected other people and how we have made choices that were dysfunctional and how that has impacted the lives of others. So we have to learn how to get over that hump, which ain't easy, but it is possible. Love me some Pia Melody. So if you have discovered that you're in a codependent relationship and then you end up in a love-addicted relationship, it could be because when you end a codependent relationship, the reality is so painful, you might rely on the fantasy of the other like you did when you were a child. So now I want to talk about, I want to talk about that yet. I want to talk about Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. Now, we're changing gears a little bit. So Think and Grow Rich is an amazing, amazing book for someone who is done. When I mean done pointing the finger. Somebody who absolutely wants to know, what can I do to start changing my vibration? You are someone who wants to resonate with abundance and who understands that codependency, childhood trauma is a lack vibration. And so if you think about a scale, right? 0 is in the middle, +1, +2, +3 represents abundance and going up the scale. To the left, it's -1, -2, -3, -4, right? So you are someone who understands, I'm at ground zero now, so I'm out of the negative zone. I understand the trauma, I understand codependency, I understand love addiction, I understand, the shame. Okay, I'm getting it. Now I'm at ground zero. Now I have to look at myself. Now, okay, this book is one of those books that will help you do that. And I want to now like I said, I write in all my books, right? So I don't even know when I wrote this, but let me tell you, let me read to you what I wrote in the back. So one of my desires is to get a book published. Final copy of my first ebook. create a self-awareness class, create a YouTube channel, create and market a product called Healing the Self Well program, give workshops, give speeches, speak at AA meetings. So I bought this book probably in the year, maybe I would say my little one, probably 1998, right? So here it is, 2021. All of these things have come true. Every single one of them have come true. I speak at CODA meetings. I do Zoom CODA meetings. I've stood and given talks, at AA meetings with my uncles. So it is it's just amazing. So I'm going to read to you a couple of things that I've highlighted. Thoughts are like magnets. They attract like thoughts. It is a well-known fact that one comes finally to believe whatever one repeats to oneself, whether the statement be true or false. If a man repeats a lie over and over, he will eventually accept the lie as truth. Moreover, he will believe it to be the truth. Now think about a little girl, a little boy growing up in a family where there's worthlessness, right? You haven't had your basic needs met, which you're entitled to. What do you believe? You're worthless. What do you tell yourself over and over and over? I'm worthless, right? Think about what he's saying. It is a well-known fact that one comes finally to believe whatever one repeats to oneself, whether the statement be true or false. This is huge. This is the secret, because what you think and believe, you create. Okay? You are the secret. You have the potential to change your reality if you can change your thoughts. And this is the book that really helped me understand that I'm worthy and it's okay to want more. You're supposed to want more. That is the stream of life. Life wants more. Think about a seed. Does a seed grow underground? Backwards? No, it grows towards the sun, right? It grows up. Everything's abundance. The universe is expanding. You're not supposed to play it small. Okay? Some people think, oh, I have nothing, therefore I'm better than the person who wants everything. You're judging the person who wants everything. Just like the people who have everything judge the people who have nothing. It's silly. It's silly. You're supposed to want. That's what desire is. That's what evolution is about. If the whole world stops wanting, we collapse. We have to want. We have to grow. We have to want to improve, okay? And this is a great statement that I heard. And it says that learners are earners. So if you don't like the amount of money that you make, learn something. If you want to make more money, learn something. If you don't like your house, learn something. If you don't like your relationship, learn something. If you don't like the way your body looks, learn something. If you don't like the way you think, learn something. It's all going to come down to personal responsibility and learning something, okay? I have plenty of sessions that I could do about the incredible amount of books that I've read. We should all be reading a couple of books a month. You want your life to improve? Read. I promise you, your life will improve if you read, okay? He goes on to say that, moreover, he will believe it to be truth. Every man is what he is because of the dominating thoughts which he permits to occupy his mind. Now, see, this is where I applied It's Not You, It's Your Programming. When I had this epiphany, like when I was reading Codependent No More, like, oh my God, it's not me, it's my programming. Like my mother was codependent. My dad's more narcissistic. My uncles are alcoholics. My grandparents were narcissistic alcoholics. Like, I'm a product of my environment. It's not me, it's my programming. Understanding the work of epigenetics, like, three cells, identical cells, all put into separate petri dishes with a different culture medium, environment, i.e. environment, all turn out to be something different. You can have 3 children, 3 identical twins, and they actually did a study like this in Long Island, which I thought was absolutely ridiculous and unethical, but they took triplets from Long Island, New York, and put them into 3 different homes, okay? And every child turned out differently. Of course, every child's different, but when you understand the vast differences in these children because of their upbringing, then you begin to understand it really is not me, it's my programming. Why is that important? Because if you can understand that, then you understand that what goes in must come out. So now, if you control what goes in, then you can control what goes out. Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill. So he says, thoughts which a man deliberately places in his own mind. When you read and when you learn, when you listen to a YouTube video or a podcast, or you take an online program, or you do meditations, or you do affirmations, thoughts a man deliberately places in his own mind and encourages with sympathy, and with which he mixes any one or more of the emotions, constitutes the motivating forces which direct and control his environment, act, and deed. Comes now a very significant truth. Thoughts which are mixed with any of the feelings of emotions constitute a magnetic force which attracts other similar or related thoughts. A thought thus magnetized with emotion may be compared to a seed which, when planted in fertile soil, germinates and grows and multiplies itself over and over until that which was originally once a small seed becomes countless millions of seeds of the same brand. Oh boy, this is serious. Remember the cycle. First you think it's you, then you realize it's them, and guess what? Then you realize it's you, because what they did to you is in you and only you can change, which I think is powerful information, but okay. So now I want to talk about my probably one of my favorite authors of all time, and that is the Mr. Nathaniel Branden, who is the author of Honoring the Self. This is probably my 6th copy because I wrote in it so much and it broke and fell apart so often that I had to just keep buying new copies. I've also bought a bunch of these books and sent them to people because that's how important this book is. It's an oldie, but it is a goodie. And again, this is for someone who you have to be the kind of person who wants to absolutely do this work and wants to figure it out. I'm just going to read you a little bit of his introduction because that alone blew me away how many years ago. Of all the judgments that we pass in life, none is more important as the one we pass on ourselves. This is just the first line of this book. For that judgment touches the very center of our existence. Who am I? We stand in the midst of an almost infinite network of relationships to other people, to things, to the universe. And yet, at 3 o'clock in the morning, when we are alone with ourselves, we are aware that the most intimate and powerful of all relationships, one we can never escape, is the relationship to ourselves. No significant aspect of our thinking, motivation, feelings, or behavior is unaffected by our self-evaluation. We are organisms who are not only conscious, but self-conscious. That is our glory and at times our burden. We monitor, assess, and question ourselves in a way possible to no other species. We ask, who am I? What do I want? Where am I going? What is my purpose in life? Is my behavior appropriate for this purpose? Am I proud or ashamed of my choices and actions? Am I happy or unhappy to be who I am? We have the ability to ask such questions, and we have the ability to run from them. But the questions are always there, waiting for our response. Even if we choose to pretend they do not exist or do not concern us, they are there when we come home after a day of a frenetic activity at work, when we come home from a party, the arms of a lover, a political rally, a charitable function, a religious encounter. I'll go on to say, the first act of honoring the self is the assertion of consciousness. Woof. The choice to think, to be aware, to send the searchlight of consciousness outward toward the world and inward toward our own being. To default on this effort is to default on the self at the most basic level. To honor the self is to be willing to think independently, to live by our own mind, and to have the courage of our own perceptions and judgments. To honor the self is to be willing to know not only what we think, but also what we feel, what we want, what we need, desire, suffer over, are frightened or angered by, and to accept our right to experience such feelings. The opposite of this attitude is denial, disowning, repression, and self-repudiation. To honor the self is to preserve an attitude of self-acceptance, which means to accept what we are, without self-oppression or self-castigation, without any pretense about the truth of our being, pretense aimed at deceiving either ourselves or anyone else. To honor the self is to live authentically, to speak and act from our innermost convictions and feelings. To honor the self is to refuse to accept unearned guilt and to do our best to correct such guilt as we may have earned. To honor the self is to be committed to our right to exist, which proceeds from the knowledge that our life does not belong to others and that we are not here on earth to live up to someone else's expectations. Go, Nathaniel! To many people, this is a terrifying responsibility. To honor the self is to be in love with our own life, in love with our possibilities for growth and for experiencing joy, in love with the process of discovering and exploring our distinctively human potentials. Thus, we can begin to see that to honor the self is to practice selfishness in the highest, noblest, and the least understood sense of the word. And this, I shall argue, requires enormous independence, courage, and integrity. I want to read you one more thing because I wrote wow next to it. In contrast to the conventional perspectives of psychotherapy, however, which tends to view aspects of the struggle in terms of illness or disease and to see human beings as more or less helpless pawns manipulated by forces outside their control, I see the endeavor as potentially heroic. It contains all the elements of a great myth or a great drama from the start along the path to self-actualization, which entails breaking free of the gravitational pull of mother, father, and family to the adventures, crises, anxieties, rites of passage, victories, and defeats that are all part of the growth process, and on to the heights to be climbed, the depths to be explored, the adversaries to be confronted in the world, and the psyche itself. And intrinsic to the drama from the beginning, the terrible and exhilarating uncertainty concerning the ultimate outcome of the story. And I wrote wow next to that. So Nathaniel Branden is absolutely probably one of my favorite authors of all time amongst all of these amazing authors. And I really wanted to share this intimate aspect of my life with all of you. You come back to listen to my podcast, to watch my videos. Many of you are inside my Facebook support group, follow me on Instagram, and are participating in one of my programs. And I wanted to share this with all of you because these are the books that shaped my new reality. These are the books that gave me the courage to face my adversaries, the courage to face uncertainty, the courage to say to family and friends, look, this just isn't working for me anymore, and I need to do better, and I need to take responsibility for myself. One of the things that Oprah shared and I never forgot was this idea that, yeah, you have to be responsible for the energy that you participate in, but also the energy that you let in. These books are all explaining divine spiritual truths to us. They all say it a different way, but they're all explaining divine spiritual truths to us, that we are enough, that our core we are divine, that, at our essence we are atoms, that what we think affects the vibrational field and the forces within each of our atoms, like it or not. We know that the book that explains that it didn't start with you is talking about generational trauma. How the heck does that happen? It happens because there's a field. You can't see the field, but it's being imprinted or impregnated on a field, and you are part of that field, even generations later. That's really exciting stuff because that means that you can affect the field of generations that are on their way to us as well. You can become a positive force. You can become a chain of change. You can break the cycle of dysfunction by learning to love yourself, by learning to find the courage, by learning to lean on the shoulders of these amazing authors who many of them have walked the path and understand this journey because they have lived it. And I don't know about you, but those are the types of authors that speak to me the most. The people that have been there. I don't want to just don't throw information at me. I can get information anywhere. I need to speak to and hear from and read from and learn from somebody that knows what it's like to ache in the deepest, darkest hours of the morning and you don't know how you're going to face another day. Like, the world just seems so overwhelming. I want to talk to that person who has figured out a way out of that mess because they have value. They absolutely have value. And all of these authors are bringing us that value. And I think that that is something really, really, really to be grateful for. Because although, and I think, if I got a chance to talk to many of these authors, they would say that we learned something and then we wanted to be of service, and we wanted to share it with the world. And that's what I've done. As a result of reading these books, I've written 7 best-selling books in the past few years, since 2012. I've created a number of online coaching programs all about evolving the soul and helping people go from being codependent, stuck in a narcissistic relationship and not knowing how to break through and how to break free, to becoming the master of their own reality. And I want to continue to evolve, and I want to continue to feed and nurture this audience and to help people understand there is a roadmap out and there is a field of potential inside each and every one of us. And that potential, it's your birthright to access, and I want to show you how to do it. And I want to say thank you to all of these amazing authors and the innumerable authors out there who have also contributed to our healing journey. Authors from thousands of years ago even. We all have a lot of gratitude that we should be offering people who have learned something and then shared that something. And guess what? You have something to share too. And so when you begin to understand yourself and you figure out what your unique, amazing value is, don't forget to share it too. Hey, if you love this content, don't forget to check out the next video, and you can go to my website and take the codependency quiz.